to our second night. Tonight, we're going to be dealing with two different topics. Topic one is fostering community-oriented leadership, culture, and accountability. And topic two is recruiting and supporting excellent personnel. So as usual, as we did last night, we're going to be breaking up into two groups. People are going to have an opportunity to give comments. And I will be moderating group one, and Bill Hughes will be moderating group two. So.
Great. Okay. Before we get started, one of the things we noticed last night is that some of the topics that we're covering tonight, we covered partly last night, but I think we could still expect to go over them again. So what I'd highly recommend, if you have the sheets that listed all the questions under fostering community-oriented leadership, culture, and accountability, to review those questions so that you're responding to that if you're in group three, right? The first group, the group that's staying here, right? And I'll go over those briefly when we break into the groups. And then in group four, recruiting and supporting excellent personnel. Some of that was, again, talked about a little bit last night. So let's dig in deeper and take that the next step around the themes that are in here. And we'll follow the same kind of process we did last night. Each person, we suggest to speak about, a little around 5 minutes max about your idea. And it would be really great if you kind of followed the process of what's your concern, what do you see as the issue? What do you suggest as an idea around it? Who would be affected by it? And what we didn't talk a lot about last night is like, how might you measure success? We had that as a separate topic, but for each of your concerns, if you could think about, if we did this, how would we know it worked, right? In your conversation that you share with each other. Does anybody have any questions before we break into the two groups? Well, if not, let's let group two go off to the other site. Does everybody who's in group two know who they are? Okay, and we'll see you over there. Okay.
Sherry, Mayor Johnson needs a link for the other room.
I think she went to the other room. Okay.
I think you got it. Okay, Newell, are we ready? You're on mute, Newell.
I think you start.
Sheriff Harrison, it looks like you're supposed to be in group two. They're asking for you to go in that group.
10-4.
Matt, you're the moderator, right, of this meeting, so you just start.
Okay, I just wanted to know if Newell was ready.
He's talking on their meeting.
Okay, and then Supervisor Metler, I'd asked for a copy of the questions.
Yeah, Sherry's sending it.
Oh,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay.
Is Sherry sending it to everybody, or because I apologize also, but I'm looking through all this data and I'm having trouble finding the specific questions. I know this group is fostering community-oriented leadership, culture, and accountability, but I don't see where there's all these questions.
I just texted Sherry to send it to you too, Rob.
Thank you. I know I've seen them in the past.
What I was going to do is review the subcategories that we should probably touch on, which is leadership and culture, tracking and reviewing use of force and identifying misconduct, internal accountability for misconduct, citizen oversight, and other external accountability, accreditation, and data technology and transparency are the subcategories that we can talk about. I think we can just go down the line and talk about leadership and culture. It talks a little bit about selection process designed to produce a police community relationship you want. Does your officer evaluation structure help advance policing goals? What incentives does the department offer officers to advance policing goals? I believe we have Lieutenant Riveros on. Did you hear the question, Lieutenant, or the statement?
Yes, I did. I'm following right along with you, sir.
Okay. In terms of a leadership structure or evaluation and policing goals, I mean, you're following civil service, correct?
That is correct. In order to be promoted, you have to score top 3 on the civil service test for the given position that's looking to be filled, whether it's investigator, sergeant, lieutenant, and that goes for both sides of the wall. And the top 3 would be the candidates that are interviewed for that position.
Okay. Can you just address briefly tracking and reviewing use of force and how do you identify misconduct? I'm sure you have an internal policy.
Yes, we do have a use of force policy, which is on our sheriff's office public website, as is the model policy for DCJS. So you can see how they are, they mirror each other. Ours obviously is specific to our agency. I'm sorry. If you give me one moment, I think I'm gonna have to go to a different room. We're getting feedback on our computers. Hang on a second.
Okay.
Wellness training room over here.
There you go.
All right, sorry about that. We're getting some feedback in the other room. I know it's back together. There weren't supposed to be any evictions till January 1st. So use of force. There are certain circumstances where we are required to fill out use of force reports. That is outlined in our use of force policy. That's also overseen by Division of Criminal Justice Services in New York. Furthermore, when a use of force incident is mandated to be reported, such as if someone's brandishing one of their impact weapons, firearm, with energy weapon, those instances also have to be submitted via the justice portal to DCJS. So there are many layers of documenting a use of force. The form that's actually done goes through chain of command. So I'll start at the lowest level. A deputy sheriff, if they were to use, say, their taser on an individual, they'd have to do that, use that use of force report, complete it, have all the persons that were present that witnessed the use of force. Their information would be on there. It would be reviewed by the supervisor, their sergeant, reviewing their paperwork to make sure that it falls within the guidelines of use of force. From there, it would go to the lieutenant. then to the captain. And if at any stage during that review, there was any malfeasance or any improper use of force, be addressed.
Okay.
That's your question.
Yep, thank you. I'm not to, I'm putting you on the spot early because I think if you can answer some of these questions, then the panel can then give their thoughts and or ideas, or we can just move on. Internal accountability and misconduct.
Certainly.
Do you have an expectation of your officers if they know of misconduct to report it?
Yeah, as part of our code of conduct, officers have a duty to intervene. That's something that was probably most predominantly brought to light with the George Floyd case. If you think of the officers that stood by and didn't take any action, the duty to intervene is what compels our officers to act in a situation like that. The duty to intervene would not only be for, say, a use of force incident such as the George Floyd incident, but for any instances where they observe their peers acting inappropriately or in violation of any of our policies and procedures. And the caveat of the duty to intervene is, let's say for the George Floyd case, if a deputy was observing another deputy using an unreasonable amount of force, just by virtue of not taking action themselves, they become criminally liable as an active participant because they did not intervene themselves.
Okay, and you have a process of monitoring that internally?
Yes, obviously through the form, the use of force form, probably the best way to monitor that is through our camera systems, which the sheriff has, allocated a great deal of funds and assets, our in-car camera systems. And I know that he's currently working with the Board of Supervisors and putting body worn cameras on every single, at least patrol deputy and member of this office, so that there is better oversight and transparency to investigate such an incident.
Good. That was actually in our budget that we just passed. So,
Thank you.
Citizen oversight and other external accountability. I think we touched on that last night, and I think there's a plan to have a further discussion on that. So, unless, as we get to your individual ideas, if you want to comment on that, that's fine. But I think there's a plan to have further discussion. I know we talked about it in depth last night. Accreditation. Everyone here knows that the Sheriff's Department is accredited. The sheriff went in detail during his presentation about the accreditation process. Unless we have specific questions, I think we can move on there. And then the other thing was data collection and technology. Right now we collect a lot of data through DCJS, and it's posted. The question is that enough data? And should we be collecting more data, or should we be fine tuning the data that we are collecting? And I think that's, again, up for discussion. So I just wanted to go over the outline of the section quickly, and I thank you, Lieutenant Rivero, for answering those questions. So I'm going to start having the panel give their thoughts. And I know that Rob Lagonia has to go to a town board meeting, so I was going to ask him to go first.
Hello, everybody. So I have some questions in regard to all of this, frankly. Most of what, well, I spoke in the last group, so I guess I could give a little bit of a discussion. We're going to do 5 minutes, Matt?
Yes, 5 minutes, and Vince is on the clock.
So for those of you that don't know, I was a judge for 16 years. I worked with Officer Rivero years ago. So my perspective is slightly different on the whole policing reform panel that we're all involved in at this point, and I appreciate being a part of it. But my sense is that when we talk about a lot of these things, these are already being addressed or have to be changed through the state legislature or through the state that's already addressing these issues. DCJS has specific guidelines that are set up for the departments. The legislature sets guidelines, et cetera. everybody here is under a certain set of guidelines, as are the judges, as are the district attorney's offices, et cetera, that are set up through the state. And so we're sitting here talking about, a citizen panel, how will we deal with somebody that potentially has an internal issue with an employee? And I guess one of the concerns or questions I have is, as a community, how much authority or how much right do we even have to step in and even be looking at some of these things? So my experience with all of these agencies, as I expressed last night, has been nothing but professional. I can't speak for the rest of the country, but I can speak for the county because I've experienced it. I've worked with probation, I've worked with the district attorney's office, the police departments. And I think if everybody does their job appropriately, things run very well in our county. I do think that when we talk about some of the sentencing guidelines, especially for judges, especially as town judges, which I expressed last night, there's a need, frankly, for that to be looked at. It's beyond what law enforcement brings to the judges. Judges don't have enough tools, is what I would consider, in their toolbox for sentencing guidelines. Sometimes somebody would come in, an individual that we would incarcerate, set bail on them because we had no other place to put them. Those are the things that I feel that need some more addressing than some of the things that we're talking about with law enforcement. There's been a lot of discussion with mental health, which I agree they could partner with law enforcement, but I do strongly feel that law enforcement are the frontline people that need to see and make that determination. So I guess my question comes in as, we talk about code of conduct, we talk about having a citizen panel, and I guess I really want to know what that looks like, and what authority would a citizen panel have to oversee a law enforcement agency, if in fact that's even possible. I don't know that. I don't know how that would work or how that would look. And what happens, I haven't had this question answered, which I'd like to have answered. If there is an internal affairs issue, if there is an officer that there's a complaint filed upon, at what point is that information even public information? That person has a right to defend themselves. That person has a right to go through the channels before that information gets out to the public or to a citizen panel. And I'm not so sure how that would work. So I would love to understand those that are saying this panel that would potentially look at these things. I'd like to understand how that would work. So I also referenced complaints no differently than filing a complaint with the DA's office, IRS, Labor Department, DEC. These are all agencies that you don't want. These are people that have power over you. So people are afraid to file complaints. I get that. I understand that, where people were saying they would maybe file a complaint through a separate group, but I'd like to see how that would work also. These are all great ideas, but pragmatically, I'm not so sure how these would work. So I'd like to see that. I appreciate being a part of the panel. I appreciate all of the thoughts and ideas that are coming out. And that's really all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Mettler.
One of the thoughts that I have, both from last night and again today, listening to the lieutenant, is that what would help a lot, I think, would be if there was better communication of all the policies which are in place that really do address the issues that we're concerned with. And so last night we were talking about a specific thing. We were talking about mental health, and then at the end, toward the end, someone said, wait a second, we already have this program which works very well. Oh, okay. So I didn't know that. I had heard it referred to before, but I didn't really understand what it was. So it almost feels to me, I don't want to be make light of this, but almost that the police would benefit from a really good PR person. And I've had these conversations with Judge Bartlett. Sometimes when I've disagreed with something that he posts, and I call him up and say, why did you do that? But sometimes I just think that, that there are policies in place. And if we could if those could be better communicated to the public, I think that the public might have greater confidence both in the police and in the fact that their concerns are being addressed. I have a question based on last night. I think maybe, I'm not sure who brought it up, asking, but it was echoed a little bit tonight by Rob Lagonia in terms of, I'm a little confused about what power or authority we really have in this panel. And one of the questions I have is, and the lieutenant could respond to this, I am assuming, I've been assuming that the Columbia County Sheriff Department, although you have to follow certain state guidelines, that you do have your own set of policies.
Mhm.
Am I right about that? Is there a Columbia County Sheriff's Office, whatever it's called, policy manual, whatever?
Yes, ma'am, there is. Every
Yeah.
division has their own policies manual. There's one that
And
covers
how
the
do those-
entire agency and breach.
How are those policies enacted? I mean, who put them in place, or how often are they reviewed? And if so, who would change them?
The policies are developed by the agency themselves with oversight and assistance from at least the law enforcement division, the Division of Criminal Justice Services, and the Municipal Police Training Council and the Bureau of Municipal Police. So, for example, if you were to go on the Sheriff's Office website where we have our use of force policy posted, next to that is the use of force model policy that was given to us by DCJS. And many of the other policies are derived the same way. However, it's a boilerplate. So each police agency has to tailor them to their specific needs and the way it would be operated, be able to be put into operation for each. So, for example, the Sheriff's Office may be slightly different than Hudson Police's or Stockport Police's or Philmont Police's based on our size, our manpower, and our resources.
Mhm.
And as far as how often are they reviewed, these are constant living, breathing documents that are always under review. They're especially, scrutinized when there's a law change, when there's a change of policy across the state, or different mandates that are changed or modified, or if there's case law that needs to
Right.
modify it. So they're constantly under review.
Well, here's just, and then I must be getting to the end of my time, but just one question. For instance, like with chokeholds, I heard it said last week, the Academy hasn't taught chokeholds forever. But my question is, are chokeholds prohibited in the policy?
That most recently, we had changed the use of force policy last year when the reporting requirements changed in New York State. So we have been on the front end of that. I'll dare say pioneers, because we changed right when the law changed that very week. Although chokeholds at that time were not specifically labeled as prohibited, when the current changes with the George Floyd and with conversations with the Board of Supervisors, Sheriff Bartlett thought at that time it was prudent to actually put that language in our policy, and that was immediately disseminated to all the rank and file to acknowledge and sign.
See,
Yeah,
I think
now.
there's to me, that's the heart of it. That's the
Okay.
heart of it. In other words, there are things that have already been done, and those are the things we should be shouting from the rooftops, saying this is what we have. It's so last week it was like, well, it hasn't been taught, but that's a separate question. Then, are chokeholds being used, and are they prohibited? And then I guess the third and final question would be, if they are prohibited, have there been instances when they have been used in spite of that? And that would be a question that, we should also deal with candidly. But the fact that we have a
The answer
policy.
to that is no. Chokeholds
Good.
have not
Right.
been used. They have not been, there haven't been any reports of that being used here, and they are not used here at the Sheriff's Office.
Right. I'm gonna
So
have
the
to,
Register or the Columbia paper should be interviewing the Columbia County Sheriff and bringing all of this out. Okay, my 5 minutes is up.
okay, Supervisor, thank you, and we can circle back, but my timekeeper tells me the 5 minutes were up.
Several minutes.
No, it wasn't that bad. Supervisor Sterling,
Hi there. Um, yeah, I agree with Supervisor Mettler that PR, there's always these rumors going around and we have to squash this rumor and that. And if one thing in this process we can do better is get those policies out there. We could just point to it and say, no, this is like this and this is like this and those kind of things. But what I want to also address is that I started feeling it last night that we're here to address racial inequality. And virtually yesterday, there was no mention of that at all. And I want to keep that target in mind and look at us all on this panel here tonight. We're all white. So
Mhm.
I feel like, how are we're talking about this involving the community and all this, but I feel it's just, preaching to our small group here. So I'm hoping going forward, maybe we can bring in a few more people representing the communities of color. And, to find out the needs of the community. I'm not the expert on it. And I want to hear from the communities. And also, it seems like our county's doing better, but still, when you look at those figures, the racial ratios are not equal. We're arresting more Black people than their percentage in the community. So I think somehow we've got to answer why.
Okay.
Thanks.
And I will say that was a topic in our group yesterday, Sarah. And we talked about that a bit. And I will say that Mayor Johnson, Bill Hughes, and Abdus are in the other group because they had an interest in the other group. So that's why they're over there. Are you done, Sarah?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Shane Zoney.
Hello, Sherman. How are you?
Good.
I just wanted to, talk a little bit about, accountability and just some of the checks and balances that are kind of baked into the system from, certain external entities when it comes to certain police misconduct. And one of the interesting changes in the law this year that particularly pertains to my office as public defender and defense attorneys across the state is the repeal of civil rights section 50A, uh, civil rights law 50A, I should say. And previously, the defense was not entitled to any of law enforcement's disciplinary records of officers who would be prosecution witnesses at trial. And this was unique in the sense that one of the tactics and basic evidentiary rules allows an attorney, whether it be the prosecutor or the defense attorney, to cross-examine a witness based on prior like bad acts or misconduct. And the in the past, disciplinary records had been shielded from us except in exceptional circumstances. And now we have access to that. And I always thought that was only fair because anyone who I'll term as was a civilian witness, if that knowledge or if that information was out there, that would be used by either side potentially in the trial. And we were on the defense side somewhat hamstrung by not being permitted to have that information. And so I think that just shows that there are checks and balances that were previously baked in the system, and there's been some change in legislation that allows outside entities also to I guess the term best is to provide some more transparency if there ever were issues that in this particular instance needed to be brought to light in the litigation, and perhaps there's things more community wide that we can talk about. And that's I just wanted to mention that, and that's all I have to say tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Lieutenant Rivero, do you have anything that you want to add?
At this point, again, I taking a position to take in information. I would echo Supervisor Lagonia's points as far as the Civilian Review Board, as far as what the role would be, a concern would be, and perhaps Mr. Carty would chime in when he has his opportunity. For a case that did go to the district attorney's office with a member here, I would believe that that information would not be public or be given to any civilian for review because it would be a criminal matter at that point. And the other point that has to make sure that I bring up is that the certain employees do have rights based by their bargaining agreements through their unions. So that would be something to also keep in mind and keep under consideration when developing the community review board. I guess that really would be the only piece that I would want to put out for clarification, and I would remain a resource for any questions that anyone else has regarding our agency.
Thank you, Lieutenant. Next on the list would be Keith Zobel.
Hi, yes, we, I'm not getting feedback, sorry. We did post our use of force policy, which is on the County Police Reform Panel website. We do have specific statements in there about the duty to intervene. I know that was one of the questions that somebody had posed. If another officer observes behavior, and that requires the OIC to respond to the scene of any such instance. Our use of force policy does not have a prohibition against a chokehold, but our thought on our policy was that it was prohibited because it was never anything that was instructed to our officers. But I know that's something that Chief Doyle had brought to my attention, and we were working on a revision to get to the to our policy, so that should be added in the very near future. Our policy clearly defines when force can be used and in what purposes, and then how it should be used. And it does have a reporting requirement anytime force is used. And in Philmont, force is not used very often. With the work and the patrol hours that we do, we're very entrenched in the community. So usually we're very familiar with the people. And, usually it's just, for the most part, we can talk to someone, get them to, talk to us without having to use force. Of course, there are certain times that's unavoidable, but for the most part, use of force by our officers is very rare. Chairman, did that answer the questions that we were looking for there?
Yes.
Okay. So,
It,
all right. And that's all. Thank you.
all right, thank you. Vince Dodo.
Good evening again, everyone. I don't know if that's on my end or where that was coming from, but I'm thinking I could speak to the part of, fostering that community relationship and what leaders can do to do that. And, upon my taking over of the directorship of the probation department, I reached out to every other agency and community-based organization that I knew of, to set up some time just to sit down, meet with them, talk with them, discuss, issues, ideas, and thoughts, and, just building those relationships with the partners in the community and those that are other agencies that we work with and community organizations maybe that we never have worked with in the past, and learning what they do, who they're working with, what's available, what's not available. And I think just getting out there and starting building those relationships can lead to a leadership position and networking position where if issues come up, it's very easy, since you already have that relationship, to make a phone call, send an email, and discuss further, whatever issues that may be out there, whether they're, issues from the community to the agency, or the agency might be looking for some help, with someone that they're working with, that they don't know who might offer that services. And just by having that relationship and making the phone call, or sending the email, problems can get solved before they get to the point where there's, complaints and bad feelings and just a lot of negativity. So I think building up the relationship and having the respect and the communication puts us all in a better position to solve a lot of these problems before they blow up into something bigger. Thank you.
Thanks, Vince. And last but not least, Ryan Carty from the District Attorney's Office.
Thank you, Chairman. So first, is that from me?
No, it's from Matt.
All right. So first, I guess I would just like to, one, highlight the level of importance that was brought up by a few of the supervisors, specifically that we here in Columbia County are lucky enough to have the sheriff's office that we do have, and all the good that they have been able to do. And so it seems that a lot of the policies that the sheriff had outlined last week, some of the things the Lieutenant Rivera was talking about this evening, are actually already being implemented and completed by our sheriff's office. So I think if we find a way to show that to the public, that our sheriff's office is doing this, that might be able to foster a little bit more community engagement as to things that members of the community like or don't realize that are actually happening. Like, for instance, the fact that chokeholds are not being taught or utilized or able to be utilized, and it's actually against their own policy. Next, I want to jump to, and I know Shane Zoney touched on it, specifically the repeal of the Civil Rights Law 50A, which allowed for police personnel files to become public knowledge, as well as utilized in defense counsel and as a prosecutor, something that we have to turn over to all defense attorneys in every case, regardless of the type of case, regardless of the conduct of the employee. What is not common knowledge with respect to that is, I believe that there, and Lieutenant Rivera could probably speak to this more, but I believe there's 4 different levels of results from a complaint after it's investigated. And I believe there's founded, and then there's unfounded, there's exonerated. I believe there's one that's higher than founded. But of those types of levels of complaints, unfounded and exonerated complaints are not made public. They are retained, and they do not fall and classify under 50A. They're not disclosed. I do not have to disclose such files. So that's one thing that I would just like to bring up. And if we're implementing a new civilian complaint, if that's what's decided, it's kind of hard to determine if they're going to meet the same standard that has already been outlined before us. It's actually in case law as well as in the policy and what is given by DCJS. As Lieutenant Rivera said, all these officers do have their own rights, and they have right to a hearing. Additionally, a concern is with respect to a civilian complaint committee is whether or not that complaint committee would ever infringe upon the district attorney's duty to investigate all crimes that occur here in Columbia County. So if, for instance, any civilian complaint were to rise to the level of any sort of criminal action undertaken by any public official or police officer, if there's a civilian complaint committee that immediately takes action, that could severely inhibit and interfere with any possibility of criminal action being pursued against any public official or police officer. So that's a major concern, I know, for the district attorney. And additionally is what we need to determine is what would the makeup of any such committee or board or any language that we want to use to call it, but who is it made up of? How many people are on it? Is it a paid position? Who gets appointed? How do you determine that these people are, have the correct requirements or, background to sit on such a committee, and whether or not there's any oversight of it. So it's a little bit difficult, especially with respect to investigations into complaints of police officers and whether or not any of those complaints would ever rise to the level of criminal prosecution. So I think that's just something that we would also want to take into consideration. And that's what I have to say. But if anyone has any other questions relative to the prosecution of cases or anything like that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you. So I think we've gone through all the panel, and I just wanted to recap, and feel free to add, but what I heard, and I was trying to take some quick notes, was a need for better PR for the sheriff's department. Authority being an issue, similar to what Ryan Carty was saying, and Rob Lagonia. What if we're going to do a civilian review board? What's the authority, and what what we should or shouldn't do? Maybe it's not a civilian review board. Maybe it's some other hybrid where it doesn't impede an investigation of any type. Racial inequity was an issue in terms of arrests. That was brought up by Supervisor Sterling. Again, civilian review board, and building community relationships was a point I had also heard. So those were like the 4 or 5 key areas that were discussed. Rob Lagonia, you're raising your hand.
Yeah, I just want to sort of piggyback onto Supervisor Mettler's question, and we were talking about this is for Lieutenant Rivero, code of conduct or your own policies and procedures that the Sheriff's Department has. I would assume that those are predominantly about hours worked, et cetera, as opposed to policing policies so much because you have so much oversight over those. Correct? I mean, in other words, you're not going to say that we're in Columbia County, we're going to have chokeholds. That can't be one of your policies. It has to go through these other review panels that you were talking about before that would even become some sort of a policy of the Columbia County Sheriff's Department, correct?
Forgive me, I'm actually going to a different tab in my on my computer here. Actually, that is in our use of force policy, and you can see that online. The actual language reads, and this is under the section of prohibited uses of force and reporting and reviewing the use of force. Something that is prohibited is uses a chokehold or similar restraint that applies pressure to the throat or windpipe of a person in a manner that may hinder breathing or reduce intake of air. Furthermore, our policies, I started to say to Supervisor Mettler earlier, there's one policy book which is for the entire agency. So that would be when you report for work, what you can and can't do, what you can do with the car, what you can't do with the car, so on and so forth. But then each of the 5 divisions has its own specific policy. So the Security Services Division would have policies on how to run the magnetometer and building security and so on and so forth. The Road Patrol would have different things for prisoner transports, taking into custody, blah, blah, blah. Jail, again.
But the question is you couldn't have your own, in your own handbook, in your own policies and procedures of the Columbia County Sheriff's Department, you couldn't all of a sudden add a policy that says chokeholds are okay, because that would be reviewed by these other boards that you just mentioned a little bit ago, correct?
Well, not that it would be reviewed by the board. We wouldn't put it in there because it's illegal. Ultimately, what governs us is Article 35 of the New York State Penal Law.
I guess that's where I'm trying to go with that, right?
Right. So, you know, personal opinions aside, it really doesn't need to say that we don't do chokeholds.
I'm only looking at it.
We can't shoot people. We know that we can't shoot people. That language isn't specifically in our policy. You know, you can do it.
So the second thing I wanted to mention was about more PR. You have a Facebook page, which, you know, there's a lot of things on there. I mean, it wouldn't, maybe not a bad idea to put those policies onto your Facebook page so that people could see those, that, you know, we don't use chokeholds. We've never used chokehold. I mean, things like that. The reality of it is you could put it on the sheriff's department's website all you want. Nobody goes to that. Most people are on Facebook and on these other social media type sites. So maybe somebody that could take that on as a PR, just showing all of the things that you're already doing, would be a very positive thing for the sheriff's department. And it'd be a good way to get it out there. People do go to the sheriff's department's Facebook page. Just a suggestion.
Thank you, Supervisor.
Yep.
Matt. Sarah's hand
Supervisor
up.
Sterling, you have your hand up?
Yeah, thanks. We'll never get this mute right. Just have to give up on that. Back to the racial question again. If we're arresting people disproportionately to their race or whatever, it seems also that they are also going to jail at a higher rate. So that would be the DA's office. And how do we kind of get some kind of data to find out, is this justified? Is this a bias? And how are we going to find that out? So Ryan, maybe you have.
I guess Supervisor Sterling, I guess my question would be, is what a bias? So first of all, I just, one of the common things is that the district attorney's office does not sentence people to jail, to probation, to prison. That's the judge's job. The judges sentence people, and Judge Lagonia would tell you, as when he was a judge, he's in charge of sentencing. While the district attorney's office can make recommendations, that's outside of our purview. And I guess I'm not sure what stats you're referring to. So if you point me, I could probably try and direct your attention a little better.
I've got pages of stats here, and of course I don't have that one tonight, but it's on the DCJS website. All counties, proportion of arrests by ethnicity, and then also going to jail. Jeannie, Supervisor,
Yeah, I could.
Do you know which chart that
Yeah,
is?
yeah, I have it. It's from the DCJS website. It's 2019 adult arrests and sentences by race and ethnicity. And the numbers are, they compare population to arrest to felony arrest to prison. So for instance, for blacks, blacks represent, according to this, as I understand it, 5% of the population of Columbia County. With regard to arrests, they represent 24%. With regard to felony arrests, 34%. And with regard to prison sentences, I believe the number is 34%. So, I mean, I think that's a starting point. And clearly, but with regard to the district attorney's office, the district attorney's office doesn't sentence people, the judges do, but the court has the right to sentence, and only the court does. But on the other hand, the district attorney's office does make sentence recommendations and might even condition pleas on a certain sentence. So, you know, the district attorney's office, any district prosecutor is certainly involved in this issue. But I want to back up from that and say that clearly these numbers, these are the hard numbers. We can't lay them all at the doorstep of the police or the district attorney's office or probation. These are clearly systemic societal problems. They go back 200 years. They have to do with race. They have to do with culture. They have to do with poverty. They have to do with class. So and those are issues that are way bigger. That would take us not another 2 months, but another 20 years to figure out answers to those questions. I think the only thing that we can do here today or in this report is to try to raise consciousness of these issues so that we force ourselves to confront them. The numbers are the numbers. So we need to figure out, well, what's going on there. And I don't know that that's a question that this panel can answer, but I think it's a question that I'm sure that Sheriff Bartlett wants to wrestle with and figure out. I mean, the easy answer is, well, that's who's committing crimes. But, clearly the more thoughtful answer is harder to decipher. But I mean, the numbers are the numbers. So I think the best that this panel can do is to try to set up either guidelines or policies, or that should try to address these issues. There was a thing on Facebook the other day, which I'm sure you all saw, or maybe you didn't, but a woman who was stopped, who she and her husband were stopped the night before Thanksgiving, and she had a veil across her face, and I guess he had a beard, and the officer says, well, do you have any guns or drugs or bombs? And her point was, why did they ask me about bombs? Again, I said yesterday, it goes back to training. I think it goes to two things. One is who are the people who are serving as our police officers, and can we have to be careful when we recruit people to try to find people without biases. But with regard to the current staff, it has to do with training, trying to raise people's consciousness of these issues, not to ask somebody who looks like they're from the Middle East, do you have bombs? I mean, that's not that anybody would give, it's kind of a worthless question anyway, really. But anyway, I mean, I think there's issues to be addressed here. I don't know the answers for sure. I don't know that any of us can.
Well, I think it's a much deeper discussion. We're not going to, obviously, as you said, Supervisor, we're not going to solve it tonight, but I think it's, part of it is raising awareness.
Yeah.
And being conscious of the issue.
And I think a lot of these issues can be best addressed if we try not to be defensive. And sometimes I feel like we're getting defensive. We're defending the police, and the police really don't need to be defended. They've got, from what we've been discussing, they do have a good record. So the first thing that we could all do is not be defensive, and then take a deep breath and say, how are we going to deal with these issues? There's issues out here. These are 200 years old, these issues. So what are we going to do to try to soften it and try to make it better? As far as this conversation before about the civilian, what do they call it? Civilian Review Board. I mean, that's the sort of thing where I think we should not be defensive. We should simply say, they have them in other communities. Let's look into it. What's involved? How can we do it? If it opens things up and gives people a place to speak, then that can't be bad. That can only be good. The separate questions about, do you cut off a prosecution or get ahead? If they're, the district attorney is saying, I want to prosecute this. I don't want these people testifying at a civilian review board when I'm still working up the case. I get that. So we need to deal with those issues, but that doesn't mean we should just turn it off. I think we should look at it and figure out how to do it.
Okay, thank you.
You know what I've been noticing is that you're covering most of the things under the first areas in here, but I didn't hear anything talked about around what police incident or complaint data should be collected, what data should be available to the public. And maybe you did, I missed it, but it seemed to me that area has not been talked about.
Well, maybe a good starting point is what are they currently collecting now? Lieutenant, are you there?
Yes, sir, I am.
Did you hear Newell?
I did. So a lot of those stats that you're referring to are generated from here, and they're reported through our uniform crime reporting and our incident-based reporting system, which is SJS. SJS is an old, outdated, antiquated incident reporting tool that is no longer supported by the state. It's on its way out. However, it's the only one that we do have. We have interviewed several other companies for incident-based reporting. And the one that we found that would suit all of our needs, of course, is $1.3 million. Not sure if the county, I know the county's not ready to spend that money. But the data that we provide, is what you're seeing on those DCGS sites. If there's more that, you would like to see us provide, I mean, obviously, I guess that's what this group is for, and that somebody can compile a list for that. And based on our software, we can try and do that. But what you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to say, and I touched on it last night, the fact that we do have a lot of data, and Supervisor Metler had also alluded to that. But what some of the public is looking for, at least from what I'm seeing through YouTube and some of the comments, they want us the data to be drilled down much deeper. The issue is, and what we have to figure out is what we can do. And, if the state isn't asking for it, should we be providing it, I guess is the question. And, I think in some cases, yes, we should be drilling down. In other cases, we probably shouldn't, because we don't have the people power, or to be able to we don't have statisticians that work for the sheriff's department. But yeah, can we collect other additional data? My answer probably is yes. Supervisor Metler, you're on mute, Supervisor.
When we talk about more data, are we talking about statistics? Because that's all I'm talking about. As the district attorney's office has made clear, in a criminal case, there's a right to the record of a particular police officer, but that goes to the right of confrontation. That's what's at stake at a trial. But with regard to what we need, we're not looking for the identity of the police officers, but simply statistics, right? And in which case, is that already available, Lieutenant?
That's a vague question. It depends on what you're looking for, I guess. But I would answer your question with another question.
Well, last night there was the chairman asked a question: have there been complaints? And the answer was no, there haven't been complaints. And I thought at the time that if we have a record which would demonstrate that, in 2020 we received 5 complaints with regard to speeding tickets. We've received 5 complaints with regard to misconduct. Those kind of figures would be more powerful, of course, than just the conclusory statements that there haven't been complaints. That's my thought. And if it's possible, then maybe that's something that could be done or recommended.
Or certainly, I mean, anything is possible. And I think what you're asking doesn't seem like it would be difficult moving forward. Going back, I'm not sure, how we would be able to retroactively find those complaints, but moving forward, say, if somebody called to complain about a ticket, we can put that in its own category. If we complained about the way it spoke to them, it would be another subcategory, and so on and so forth. But again, to answer that with another question, I would need to know what matrix and what you would want, what data you would want collected. Whatever the group decides as a whole. And then obviously, I can't speak for the sheriff. He's going to have the final okay with that.
How much time do we have, Newell?
You're on mute.
I'm going to suggest you take a 5-minute break, and you've got probably another 20 minutes if you need it.
Okay.
Okay. But the other groups, I suggest you guys could take a 5-minute break. They're going hot and heavy for
Okay.
a while longer.
Is a 5-minute break all right with everyone? Okay.
Take
Thank
a look
you.
at the questions, you know. Yeah. See if there's
Yep.
anything you feel is missing.
couple of minutes.
Yeah. And the other group
Chairman,
will join you
I
at
have to-
7:30.
I'm sorry, but I have to jump off, but thank you. I thought it was a good discussion.
Okay, thank you, Supervisor. We'll talk.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
So what time are we going to reconvene, Noel?
They're going to come join you at 7:30.
Okay.
Yeah, you might walk through the questions from the top and see if you feel like you've covered them, you know?
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of the beginning questions can only be answered really by the sheriff's department, 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, so just
Yeah.
say, pass those on, put those in the parking lot.
And sort of, that's what Lieutenant Rivero was sort of referring to when I was asking him at the beginning of,
Right.
those are the three questions that I was asking him about. So is everybody back on? I think we lost a couple.
Let's see, you've got Keith, Shane. Well, you knew Bob Lagonia had to go, right?
Yeah, he had a meeting. He had his board meeting tonight.
Gene just left. Yeah. Keith's here, Shane's here.
Let's, we can get started.
Yeah, I think you're all there.
And, we can sort of concentrate on, if you're looking at the questions, question 4, it says citizen oversight or other external accountability. The first question is, what level of review should be conducted? Should it review the findings of an internal affairs bureau or conduct its own investigation? That was one question. The next question, what power should it have over to interview officers or witnesses, or to compel officers or other witnesses to be interviewed and to review documents, recordings, interviews conducted by internal affairs or other evidence? Should it be empowered to impose disciplinary action, recommend disciplinary action, or simply substantiate complaints? Should it be authorized to formally refer cases to the Attorney General or the District Attorney? And what mechanisms are in place to ensure subject and witness officers fully cooperate with civilian oversight investigations? It just seems that some of this, I mean, depending on how you implement it, could be an overreach in terms of, I guess we need to find out what happens now, and we touched on that. I know that the sheriff had told me that if there's a case of potential misconduct, sometimes they'll kick it to another agency, like the state police or something like that. Is that correct, Lieutenant?
That is correct. There are at least 2 cases that I can think of off the top of my head that immediately went to the state police for investigation on some of our members. Just to not have it be a conflict or have there be any issues, and to make sure that it was, not that we wouldn't have handled it prudently, but just to make sure there was no question.
Okay. Sarah, you had a question?
Yeah, I know. Last night in the group I was in, we discussed this a lot too, the Civilian Review Board, and it seems to be there's a lot of, it's problematic of what authority they would have and a lot of that. And I think that, I guess where it says a number of existing oversight entities to look at as models, what we really have to do is see where one that works and that we could implement. Probably don't have to reinvent the wheel, but it may be that we can't step in there because there's so many problems, legal problems there.
Yeah. Well, I know in conversations with Bill Hughes that he had conversations with two different attorneys who had indicated to him that you need to be careful on how you approach it. Because there's some legal, could be some legal implications. And again, you don't want to mess up a case for the district attorney's office either. But I think that's something, it was brought up last night, it's brought up tonight. I think that's an issue that we need to delve into further and have further discussion and research on it.
Yeah, maybe even if the complaints wouldn't necessarily be public, but could that be something that's brought to, say, the Public Safety Committee every so often? The sheriff reports, well, we've had a spate of complaints or we haven't had complaints.
Well, it could be the Public Safety Committee, or it could even maybe be a subcommittee of public safety, where it would include maybe a couple of members from the committee and maybe some outside members, community members. Is a possibility.
What you might want to identify in your plan is what is it you're trying to achieve, and then figure out how to do it. So it's first like what's the intention, right? And then look at what you can legally do and what it is. I think sometimes for a lot of these we need to make that distinction. What's your basically your conditions of satisfaction.
I do have a question for Lieutenant Rivero.
Yes, sir, I'm here.
In the accreditation process, are these issues addressed through accreditation?
Are you talking about panels?
Well, citizen review panels or employee misconduct.
Yes, they are.
Okay.
Section. Obviously, we have to provide our proof, which is the policy and how it's carried out. And there are certain proofs that are submitted, obviously names redacted, certain circumstances surrounding the case redacted, but the findings of the investigation, what transpired with the investigation, the ultimate finding is also submitted as a proof that we are in compliance with our policies.
Okay. Thank you.
Just so you know, there is no civilian review accredited, only for what our complaint process is.
Okay. Thank you. Sarah, is your hand raised from before, or is that a new question? Okay.
It's from before, but I think one good thing we can address now, there's so many, the rumors and the gossip out there. And this is a great chance to really address some of that, and how can we tame that down in the future? And the big, nobody knows what is unknown about complaints. So if we have some method here and that's good about hearing, if you have to already address it with accreditation, then there's a known fact we can put in there. Yeah, we address it.
Yep. So the final category is data. And I guess I'm going to jump to the very last item under data is that as we talked about earlier, the Board of Supervisors in consultation with the sheriff has put money in the budget for body cams, and that's for a dual purpose. It's to protect the public, but it's also to protect our officers. So if there's an arrest and an issue, it'll be on the body cam, and both sides would be protected in one way or the other. I think it's a pretty sizable investment by the Board of Supervisors. I think it's $100,000 a year, but I think it's well worth it in terms of transparency in terms of what happens during an arrest or even a stop. It doesn't have to be an arrest. The sheriff's department went to great lengths to purchase car cams, but this will be even, another level of, I guess, security and review with the body cameras.
So that's everyone, every time they go out the door, they're wearing,
If they're on duty and they're in the field, Lieutenant, is that correct? They'll be wearing a body cam?
Well, I'll start where we are at the current juncture in time. Right now, the cameras are mounted and fixed inside of the patrol units. They're forward facing and rear facing, so it would capture anything happening in front of the police car and anything in the back seat of the patrol car. The officers now, the deputies now, are mic'd up, so you can hear what they're saying regardless of where they go. However, they're only visible when they're in view of the camera. The body cameras that we're hoping to move to will work in conjunction with the car cameras, and you will get a view from the member's chest area, wherever they mount it. And it is a wide, so you will be able to, again, see and hear the transaction between the officer and the person that they're engaging at that time. And those will be on it'll branch out. It's starting with all the uniformed personnel that are answering calls, and it'll migrate out to the security services and all sworn members.
Sarah?
I have one more. I've lost all my other supervisors, so I have to. The language translating, I understand we have that computer program now.
We do have a language line that we use that can be
Yeah.
done on the phone, yes.
Right. So do you know how often that is used, or?
There's no tangible way for me to know, not at this juncture. I would imagine perhaps there's a way based on our account that they can see how many times that we dial into it.
So
But I can't. Yes, it is done by phone.
Would dial in on the phone and.
Correct.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Anybody else have anything? Noel?
Sounds like you've covered everything that I read in the questions here, one way or another, at least have a preliminary sense of it. The other group's got a little further to go, so why don't you guys want to take a little break? Come back.
All right, so they're coming back here at 7:30?
They'll be back with you at 7:30.
Okay. I'm sure they have ways that they. All right, gang, thank you. We'll just.
I think the police agencies, especially the smaller police agencies.
We lost. Group one, we talked about fostering community-oriented leadership, culture, and accountability. And the points that sort of rose to the top was the need for better public relations by the sheriff's department or about the sheriff's department. That the sheriff.
Go ahead, Sherry's having a hard time.
That people don't have an understanding of how much the sheriff's department is doing, and it would be good for finding a way to inform the public maybe on a regular basis. In talking about civilian review boards, the issue of authority came up. What authority would it have? I think everybody was in agreement that there needs to be further discussion on the issue and to see what shape it would take. But there was some concerns about impeding investigations and things of that nature. And I know I've talked to Bill Hughes about it, and he has some ideas. And I think we just need to spend a lot more time on that particular issue. Racial inequity in terms of statistics and arrests was an issue that was brought up. The concern about the fact that there's a disproportionate number of minorities being arrested, imprisoned, and so on. And I guess the question was brought up, why? And we need to look into why that's occurring. And is it racial bias? Is it a variety of other issues? But there needs to be, again, some more work that needs to go into looking into this particular issue. And the other issue was building community relationships. The group thought that was important, and we touched on it yesterday as well, that there needs to be better relationships with the community and community members. I think, I'll say it from my perspective, I think the sheriff the sheriff's department does a good job, but I think it needs, there's obviously things that we can improve on in terms of community relations. So those were sort of the high points. We talked about tracking and reviewing use of force and identifying misconduct and internal accountability for misconduct. And Lieutenant Rivero did a good job of explaining what the sheriff's department does and how they track. And they do have a system in place to do that. I sort of put Lieutenant Rivero on the spot early on, but he did a good job of answering those questions. Did I miss anything from group one? Okay. Millie.
Thanks, Matt. Bill Hughes, would you share what happened in your group?
So we had a lengthy discussion around training, diversity, acquiring talent, and also hiring. And some of the points that were brought up, a lot of the things brought up by the sheriff was civil service being an obstacle for people. That was a pretty broad discussion, and some of the ways that we can probably not get around civil service, but that we could probably do a better job in the community to help people get used to taking the civil service test and making them eligible. We also talked about a oversight committee or some kind of diversity committee, which was brought up by several people. Sheriff Harris had some great comments around that. The mayor has some great comments around that, about having a committee that would talk about diversity, go out through the communities, have an ongoing relationship with the sheriff's department as well, and working with them as far as when they get into doing recruitment. There was a lot of ideas around doing recruitment ideas, going to schools, reaching out to communities, working with nonprofit organizations, We touched on mental health again a little bit. That's going to be a huge topic, and we're probably going to need more time to get onto that. Um, I'm sure I'm forgetting some because I didn't take as copious notes today. Uh, Hello, guys. What were some of the other things that we discussed as well?
We talked about finding a not-for-profit or organization that could help prep people for the civil service exam. When we talked about hiring diversity, that seemed to be one of the obstacles, was that civil service exam. And because the civil service exam only happens every 4 years, having an outreach effort, 6 months or so before that test occurs to really try to recruit more minority and women populations to take those exams. And while the county, it doesn't sound like, can prep them for it, we could have an outside organization or not-for-profit that could really help do practice testing and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
One of the things that you talked about with the community, the oversight community group, was it would be made up of diverse individuals, a diverse group of individuals from the community.
Yes.
And another important thing I think that came up was talking about implicit racial biases and working within diversity and building those relationships on both sides so that minority communities don't have a stereotype of the police being bad guys, and so the police don't have a stereotype of some minority communities maybe being more dangerous, and really getting to know each other on a personal level and working to overcome some of those biases that we all hold.
And the sheriff also mentioned about having the body cams having cams that are already in the car to see what's going on. And also body cams are a big thing that they're working on right now.
Yep.
And I will say that we discussed body cams in our group as well.
Okay.
So.
Right. But what I will say though is, Mr. Chairman, is that the oversight committee or racial diversity committee, you have a real consensus from our committee about that. Now, how you would go about doing the makeup and who serves on it, I think is a discussion to be had. But should we have it in place? I think it was, at least in my committee, a total agreement of that's something that should be had.
And well, if I could just add, I think it should be for more than just the sheriff's department. I think it should be countywide.
Yeah, that was also brought up, that it should be more than just the sheriff's department.
Yeah.
So I'd be willing to entertain that.
Awesome.
Chairman Morrell, can I ask a question about your group? You mentioned the Civilian Review Board oversight, which is something that came up in my group last night as well, and looking at confidentiality and authority and all of those things. I would encourage, and I'm happy to do some of this research, there are civilian review boards of law enforcement all over the country. And so there's probably models that we can look at as opposed to trying to recreate the wheel, where they are successfully having some sort of civilian review process. And actually, we keep talking about community relationships and building the relationship between law enforcement and community. And right on policechiefmagazine.org, it says oversight agencies can help improve community relations by fostering communication between the community and police agency. And when they've done studies that have looked at civilian review boards versus complaints being handled within, they've actually found much greater success with the community civilian review boards and the relationships that are built there. So I'd be happy to do a little research if you want me to, as to how other communities are doing it, and share that with you.
That's fine. I think we need, again, in our group, we discussed that it's an area of interest, but I think there, as we said, the devil's in the detail, in terms of we need to look at different models, but we also need to look at to make sure that it doesn't impede certain things in certain investigations.
Yep.
Is there anything else we need to make sure we cover?
So I do think though, the issues that we're talking about when you're talking about race relationships and recruitment and things of that nature, that it's a longer discussion than what we had tonight, and so I would think that we would probably need at least another meeting discussing that, just around those topics alone.
I envision us having a few more meetings, but not until after the holidays.
Yes.
Does anybody else want to add anything before we kind of call it a night and get ready for those meetings in January? Vince?
Vince?
Thanks. I just wanted to mention this with regards to, recruiting and creating a more diverse staff. Folks out in the community, if you know someone that's interested in learning more about not just a job in a police agency, but any of the departments within the county, you can reach out. Don't wait till there's a civil service exam. We can start much earlier that with internships or mentorships or just having a conversation so that we could encourage folks at a younger age to get involved in these agencies so we can have a more diverse staff. We don't have to wait to train people just to take the test. You can start much earlier and foster that communication and relationship within your communities.
And that's a great point, Vince. And to that point, when we did the program with Greg Mosley and Operation Unite, we didn't focus on law enforcement, meaning street officers. We focused on the whole chain, training people on corrections, on patrol officers, probation officers, dispatchers. I mean, there's so many jobs that are available. We were like, look, there's other opportunities. You don't have to be a road officer. You can be, become a dispatcher. So yeah.
Very good. Okay. Matt, do you want to share what the next steps are?
Well, the next steps are we're going to take the committee, which would be myself and Bill Hughes, Mike Benvenuto, Sherry Newell, and the sheriff. We're going to take a look at the input we've received and sort of put it in a format that we can look at and it's understandable. And then I think we as a group, this group needs to start developing actual action plans so that we can move forward. So I think that.
I'm sorry, Matt, there are also still another subject that we didn't get to cover at the end of our session. So there's still some other things that we might need to tie some loose ends up to.
Okay.
Sorry.
No problem. But we need to start getting to some action steps sooner than later. I think the last 2 days, yesterday and today have been great. I think there's been a lot of good discussion, a lot of good input. So what we're going to do is, as sort of the work group, is to try to put things in order and in a manageable way so that we as a larger group can deal with it. And we're not the end all be all, but we want to be able to at least put something so we can start at least taking some action and moving forward.
Great. Okay.
And also part of that is checking the box of the things that are already being done and are being done well. And I think, that's considerable.
Yeah. Great. Well, I just want to thank you all for putting in this effort. It clearly is starting to demonstrate through these kinds of conversations how much you can learn from each other and what might be really possible for Columbia County. So I just want to applaud you all for your effort here. It's been a very great bunch of meetings to move this agenda forward. And it does take time. There are a lot of different point of views and there's a lot to know here. So Great work. Thanks.
Hey, I wanted to wish everybody a happy holiday.
I was going to say the same thing. Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays. I think Sheriff Bartlett was going to sing us out, right? Isn't that what we agreed?
Was it? Yep.
I'm waiting for this.
Not while we're live.
Your partner left.
Thanks again. Okay.
All right, all. Thank you.
Happy holidays, everyone.